Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Balance in Life, where we are revisiting the topic of schooling this fall. We know it's on the minds of so many people, and we are pleased to have joining us again Andrea Carson Johnson to help us with the Q&A session. She's brought along an amazing colleague, Mrs. Williams, who's also a former Teacher of the Year, and they're going to help guide us through this conversation as both teachers and parents of children who are in school. They're going to help guide us and have a short presentation and then open up the floor for a Q&A. As a quick reminder, if you are posting questions or thoughts in the chat box, you can send those just to the panelists, so just to us, or you can use the drop-down menu and post it to all panelists and all attendees so others can see your questions or your responses. So on behalf of Virginia Cooperative Extension Human Development Program Team and NC State University, we welcome you. And I'm your host, Dr. Crystal Tyler Mackey. And without further ado, let's get started into this topic. So welcome.
Can you all see my screen? Is everything there?
No.
No. Okay, let's try it again. Share my screen. Are we good now?
Yes.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Carson Johnson. I'm here with Ariane Williams. We're going to move really quickly through our presentation so that we leave a good chunk of time for question and answer. So you'll hear me speak for a little bit, and then Ariane will speak for a little bit, and then we want to hear from you all. So if you're here last week, you saw this already. I'm a nationally board certified teacher. I currently teach for Salem City Schools. I used to teach for Suffolk Public Schools prior to moving to Salem. I teach a full range of students. Every year I teach at least 2 inclusion classes with a special ed teacher. I have my BA from UVA, my master's from VCU, and I'm currently working on my EDD. And I am a career switcher. I worked for Virginia Cooperative Extension first as the program director at the Airfield 4-H Educational Center. And most importantly, I think to this discussion, not only am I a teacher, but I'm also a parent juggling the challenges of this new world. I have a rising 6th grade daughter and a rising 4th grade son.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ariane Williams, and I currently hold a BA from Old Dominion University. I have a master's from Norfolk State University, and I'm currently preparing to defend my dissertation from Grand Canyon. I teach regular English, and I also teach upper level English. I'm also a curriculum writer. Just like Andrea, I'm a mother of a recent high school graduate. I have a rising 4th grader, a rising 2nd grader, and I also have a little 3-year-old.
We are in the business of balancing life. So we understand where y'all are. I shared this slide last week, and I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but if you're new to us this week, we had a seismic shift in our lives in the spring, and everything turned upside down. And for some of us, it was really overwhelming. There was too much to take in. It felt like standing in front of a fire hydrant. And then it was really hard balancing our children at home while we were trying to work. One of the big takeaways is that this fall, the schools are going to have a centralized learning management system. So you'll be hearing from your school systems soon whether your schools will be posting all of their assignments on Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas. Those are kind of the big 3 learning management systems. Ariane, you want to start on the slide and I'll pick up?
Yes. So we did want to take a little bit of time this morning just to give you all some tips on how to prepare your children for online learning. One of the things that's important is creating a distraction-free learning space. And I know even with my own children, I had to make sure that the space actually represented the feel of the classroom environment. So they did have to get up in the morning and get dressed like they were going to school so that they can feel like they were in part or a part of the classroom environment. What also helped us was making a schedule and sticking to it. We did post schedules around the house. We color-coded calendars and getting plenty of exercise. Now, one of the things that I did want to point out was developing an eating plan, and a garden actually helped my children at home as well. And so that's something to also consider when you're trying to look at preparing your children for online learning for the fall.
And then one of the things I learned co-teaching this spring with a special ed teacher is that accessibility apps are so key when you have special ed students learning at home. And sometimes your teachers will do a good job of making that available to your children, or their case manager will. But I've put a link in here. These are really, really good assistive technology apps that you might want to do some research on if you know that you're going to be doing hybrid or distance learning in the fall. We put here, you are your child's best advocate. So don't be afraid to reach out to your child's teacher. Emails, phone calls. I was calling home a lot more than I usually do in the spring. So I think building that relationship with your child's teacher is going to be especially important. Ariane put this one in here and I love it. It's so true. Creating a writing journal for that social emotional check-in, checking in with your children at dinner time or at bedtime, but having that be a set routine, a part of your day. And then this is so important, developing that reward system. Humans are reward-based. What is the carrot you're gonna hang in front of your kids to get them to do what you need them to do during the week? For us, at my house, we're in walking distance to a 7-Eleven, so it's Slurpees on Friday. Ariane, what did you do with your kids?
Well, one of the things that that we did was we had to go out into our neighborhood, and since we had the garden, we had to drop off different things and vegetables on the porches of our older neighbors, and so that's something that they like to do, and so we use that as a family ministry time is what we did.
I love that. Ariane, you want to talk to this slide?
Yes. So building relationships, I noticed during this time, I have one of my daughters, she's kind of quiet, but then I have another one, she's kind of a little bit more outspoken and outgoing. And so one of the things that, that is important is becoming a parallel partner. And you want to make sure that you choose a working partner or help your child to choose someone that's in the neighborhood, or either it could be another student, so that they can collaborate in between assignments and projects. Now, even though they might have different projects, they can still work on inspiring each other, and they can actually conduct a little weekly check-in just to see how I'm doing. And they can be uplifting and, like each other's little cheerleaders is what we like to call it.
I love that. And then there were a lot of questions I think about. So there's a movement away from the word at risk, but our at risk, I like to say at potential students, but our vulnerable student population. And so we wanted to put a slide in here that speaks to that for our special education students, our 504 students, our English language learner students. Again, reaching out to administration, the special ed teachers, the case managers before school starts. Don't wait until a crisis erupts to start building those relationships. Discuss the emotions. Ariane wrote this sentence and I love it so much, but what happened, we know the spring was crisis learning. Speaking with your kids, what went well? And this is not just for vulnerable students, but all students. What went well? What was hard? What do we need to change in the fall to make it not feel like crisis learning, but actually more like school, even if we're not in brick and mortar? This is on the teacher's end, but sometimes on the parents' end too, really innovative activities for engagement. And I spoke to this last week. If there's any good that comes from the pandemic, I hope that we're moving away from teacher-focused instruction to student-focused instruction. And if you're not getting a lot of choice and voice for your students from their teachers, if they're not giving your children a lot of opportunity for hands-on learning, I would advocate for that. And then did you want to talk a little bit about the bingo process reward? I love that idea, Ariane.
Yes, one of the things that I noticed years ago, I taught a self-contained class for special education, and I decided to put just positive words of encouragement in little small spaces. And so what they had to do was they had to keep track of their progress by actually pinpointing their emotions. And so, and it can only be positive. And so once they hit that, that 4, that 5, then you can go back and you can implement the reward system. So I think that creating a bingo with positive words will help encourage special education students as well.
That's awesome. And then again, do your research now on any assistive technology that you can download to Chromebooks or iPads or any of those things that you might have at home for your children. I pulled this off of EdSurge. for those of us who are teachers who are going to find ourselves in hybrid, which is where I am right now, I'm going into the fall, there's some things I'm going to need to do to change my classroom around to make it safe. So I'm going to need clear signage for safe flow of student traffic and seating. I'm going to need to minimize my teacher space and declutter my room so that the bulk of the room is for student space. And I love this idea so much. And I think Ariane spoke to this for at-home learning too. We have got to give our kids some safe movement, some brain breaks. They cannot be sedentary all day. So how do we build that into our day in brick and mortar or at home? Lots of student choice and voice, maximizing if our kids are in school. Us teachers that are doing hybrid, we're maximizing that time for student-focused instruction, relationship building, group presentations, group work, discussion, and then online time for engaging activities. I really, really hope your school system is moving away from traditional teacher-focused learning. I think they are. We've been doing PD all summer. Many school systems have. How do we make online learning more engaging? So I think you're going to see a more professional sort of outlaying of online learning than we saw in the spring. We learned so much of what worked and what didn't.
Okay,
Ariane,
oh, okay.
sorry. I was gonna say, Ariane triggered, she was posting on social media yesterday about this topic, and I said, you have to put this in the presentation because this is such a, I think, an emerging issue. And I love that she's gonna speak to it today.
Okay, so my question was, how does PPE look in the schools that's in the same district? And so although we might live in the same district, it may look different in different areas. Now, in those particular areas, you may have some parents who work from home, and so it's easier if you work from home to provide that support and that assistance that your child might need. However, on a different spectrum, we have parents who do not work from home, but they may need additional resources. And so one of the things that I did notice was that fundraisers, they may take place in specific locations. And so it's not equitable if you have fundraisers in certain areas and then you do not have those fundraisers in lower economic areas. And so fundraisers can help with needed things for teachers and supplies and different things like that. But then you're going to have some teachers who do not have access to those particular things. So that is something to think about as well. And also in some areas, parents, they come in, they fill in the gaps because they are available. But if you have to work 2 or 3 jobs, you may not be able to fill in that area and that gap of need, which leads us to unequitable educational opportunities.
And that is our largest concern, and I think a lot of people were sharing that last week too. We're going to see a bigger divide in our achievement gap. I was reading yesterday, and they're to Ariane's point, they're starting to call these pandemic pods, where small groups are going to get together, and parents are going to take turns being the tutor for a day for these kids who are doing online learning. And the pandemic pods are going to be wealthier kids, probably white kids, and then you're going to see learning just continue to take off for our kids, our haves, and then the achievement gaps for our kids who cannot be a part of these pandemic pods. So if you haven't heard that term yet, you should Google that. It's quite interesting, and I think it's again where we see learning in the United States is not equitable. We've known that before. Schools make it more equitable. How can we as teachers and community members try to keep learning equitable even when we're not in brick and mortar schools? That's going to be our mission. I spoke to this last week. I won't spend a lot of time here. Whether we're in brick and mortar or online, social emotional learning is going to be the focus of teachers during this next year. We're going to be answering the trauma of the spring and trying to build relationships as best we can, even if we're behind a computer screen. I found this article this morning. I love it so much. It's a South African mom, and she's talking about how she wants to raise her children during a pandemic. And yes, we need to be careful, but relationships are still important. That is key in this next year while we're trying to make our way out of a pandemic. We don't want our kids to be disconnected. And then last week I shared with you that the Florida Department of Education had put together a really awesome website of learning at home resources. Well, in this past week, the Virginia Department of Education put one together too. And so I wanted to give you that link because It's for summer learning to prevent summer loss, but it's really activities that you can use once we go into the fall too. Really a really cool resource that the DOE put together. And as I was researching for today's presentation, a lot of you all are youth activists or youth educators. This youth.gov, I've never seen this website before, but I went through it this morning, and there's so many cool teacher and parent and educator, even if you're doing informal education, lots of things about how to teach equity, lots of things about how to be representative in your education. This is now starred. I'm going to use this in my school. There were questions about youth in poverty, educating youth in poverty. Now this from the ASCD, which is a go-to for me as an educator, is kind of brick and mortar focused, educating youth in poverty, but there are still some really good resources here. I suspect Ariane and I will get some questions about that in just a moment. And then if you've not used the Khan Academy, it's free. That is a really good resource, brick and mortar or not, for meeting your children's academic gaps, especially for math and science. I would recommend making a Khan Academy account for your children. All right, try to get through as quick as we can. Open up the floor to questions. So Ariane and I are ready. We're ready to answer your questions.
Great, thank you so much. And the questions are definitely rolling in. So if you have a question that you would like to pose, please put that in the chat box, and we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can. So one of the questions, not surprising, and you started to touch on this a little bit, but for parents that do not work from home, how will this work? How are the kids going to be taught when parents have to work and don't have someone to, they say, homeschool the kids?
I'll start answering that. I think that that's where that idea of the pandemic pod that I was just speaking to is emerging from, where parents are thinking that they'll take one day off a week and then they'll just gather parents from their neighborhood and each of them takes a day essentially doing daycare. So they're working for 4 days and home for a day, and they're swapping that idea of daycare. And I think that, again, that's a unique way to handle that situation, but there's still an idea of halves there, that you have the opportunity to take off work, or that you work in a way that you know that you're not bringing the virus into your pandemic pod. For essential workers, and probably, if we're being honest, our more low income workers, I think this is the crux of what makes this so overwhelming. We can't afford daycare. We don't have access to other parents who can help babysit our children. We may not have parents who can help babysit our children. I hope that we're not going to see a bunch of kids left at home, but I do worry as a teacher that is the reality of what we're going to see, kids at home by themselves. And then that opens a whole nother issue of trauma and lack of social emotional support. We've been talking at school systems. We hope that we see Parks and Recreation and YMCA step up to the plate and offer more childcare. But Crystal, you and I were talking earlier this week, there's probably going to be more demand than there is trained childcare providers. In my own house, I'm struggling with that. When my husband has to be at work and I have to be in school teaching, I think we're going to rely on teenagers, students. That's not the best option, but it's our option. And then what will probably likely happen is when I come home from work, then I will do my own children's school with them and not require the teenager to do that. That just seems unfair. But it's going to be really hard. Ariane?
Yes, and I wanted to add, I wanted to go back with the partners and making sure that your child, like will have a partner that can hold, your child accountable. And so one of the things that did work for us was that I did set up my with one of my child's children. I did set her up with a buddy, and she worked with that buddy throughout the day, and then coming home in the evening from her mom, we would sit down and we would kind of talk to them about, hey, like what worked, what did not work today, what did you not like about, like your online experience. And so having those particular conversations and making sure that they complete those emotional journals so that you can understand how to create a plan to attack that that particular emotion that that your child is facing or faced for that day, I think is important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. This is a related question. Do you have strategies for families with limited support in the home?
Erin, you want to start? You want me to start?
You can start.
Okay, I feel like that's me. I live on the other side of the state from my parents and my in-laws. And so we've been here now for several years, but when we first got here, it was my husband and I were reliant. We couldn't do anything because we didn't have childcare. So I think it's especially hard when you don't have family around. And I think that's where we're going to have to get creative. I think teachers and I have been talking about how do we share childcare, because also this is now expensive. We haven't paid childcare in years. So how do we pool support, I think, with other families who are also, I think, feeling the bind of not having readily accessible childcare. So I'm talking with other teachers, how can we pull together, share babysitters, take time. My husband is probably gonna have to do some flex working, which I don't think he loves, but he's gonna have to. So I think hopefully other industries will step up and realize parents are gonna have to telework. They're not gonna be able to come back to work full time the way that some places want them to. So advocating with your place of business, can you telework a couple of days a week still once we go back in the fall, balancing childcare as best we can. Again, there's no, to me, that's the most overwhelming piece of what's going to happen in the fall, especially when you don't have good supports at home, family around you.
And I do know that I did have a student during the pandemic that he was having an issue with getting, you know, his things done, and I was able to help him individually. And so when it became a little overwhelming, because I still have my 3 children at home, and then I have this particular student, his mom was working 2 jobs, and so she wasn't home a lot. I did reach out to a local church in the area that was close to his house, and they actually had tutors, and they had different people available that was able to help him. And so they created a little rotation chart, and they were able to help him. And not only did it help him academically, but it kind of it just helped him emotionally, you know, as well. And so I think pulling from the local churches and different you know, different groups like Andrea stated, I think that's that will be important.
Great, thank you so much. So there's another question here. You spoke about the social emotional learning style. It says, how will the social emotional learning style be done and meet SOL objectives?
I have a lot to say about that, but Ariane, I feel like I keep talking. Do you want to answer that one first? I know this is also a passion area of yours, like really meeting the whole child. Did you want to speak first here?
Well, I always believe that that we're never teaching to the SOL, and so if we're not teaching to the SOL, we're teaching skills in the classroom, then the students will get the skills they need so that they can pass the SOL. Now, on a different side with the social emotional learning, I think that that once we begin to create different activities in the classroom, discussions, healthy discussions, things that's going on in the world today, it brings the students in, and once we bring them in that way, then we're able to connect them to a different learning path. And so I don't know. I just think that it looks like mainly like having discussions, having them to go out in the community and do different things. One of the things that my upper level students did this year, I had them to create a visual research activity, and they had to write letters. And so they couldn't turn those letters in because, you know, everything was shut down. But now moving forward, they can have a chance to turn those letters in. And so it helped them. And we allowed them to pick issues and things that were going on in today's society. And it helped them emotionally. And so I allowed it to allow the students to drive their particular research, and I didn't drive it. So giving a little bit to the students, I think it would help to align that social emotional learning, and then they can be academically successful, and it will align with the SOL.
I love that. That's right. You don't squeeze out, you don't do social emotional here and the content here, that it's always blended together. And I know it's harder in math and science, but can they journal? Is there discussion? Do they have an opportunity to self-reflect? Do they have an opportunity to apply the content to their real world? All of that is social emotional learning. Do they have an opportunity to work with teams? Do they have an opportunity to communicate with their peers? Even in math and science, it's easier for us as language arts teachers, but if they're doing that in math and science class, that is social emotional learning. So it is a blended approach to student first in the classroom. And I also share, we were able to get a waiver last year from SOLs. There are many, many teacher advocate groups across Virginia and across the nation hoping for waivers again this year, so that we have more time to focus on social emotional learning and less drill and kill for an SOL. I'm not sure that will happen, but there's a large movement of advocacy for that to happen, so teachers can focus on the whole child and less on content drilling. So keep your fingers crossed. Lots of people working towards that end.
Thank you both. I have a logistical question. I was thinking that the virtual would be interactive, sort of like a Zoom meeting where students can ask questions and be live with their teachers. Is this true or even an option?
Well, it is. It is an option. I know that that's what I did. There were certain days when I had it was called an individual day, when you had to work on certain assignments. But then we did have to we had to meet. And one of the things that we did outside of English was we had to create a meal together, you know. And so I think that that bringing those lessons in virtually, and going back a little bit, that kind of goes into to the mix of social emotional learning as well. But we did have a chance to be interactive with those particular learning or activities in the classroom at home.
And I think there were school systems that did not allow Zoom in the spring because it was crisis and there were security issues. Zoom has worked on that. I think there's a realization of that. Some school systems that didn't allow Zoom are now allowing Google Meet as a part of Google Classroom. Lots and lots of learning apps are free to teachers now that allow face-to-face interaction or peer interaction within the Google Slides, so like Pear Deck. So there's lots of things that teachers are learning in terms of technology that allows more integration. And I think that even in school systems that it did not allow face-to-face virtual instruction with Zoom during the spring have realized that has got to be in the fall on one platform or another, so that we can see each other and we can build relationships. Students have to see their teachers. It just has to be. And even though we're in hybrid, so some of my students will actually be in the classroom, we've been mandated that we have face-to-face videos for the online portion too, so that even when our students are in our classroom, they're still gonna have access to our face. It's so key. So I think you will see an increased presence from your teacher in an online platform in the fall.
And Andrea, I also wanted to add as well. I noticed even though I teach high school and my kids are at elementary level, we have to be able to connect with each other, the elementary, the middle, and high school teachers, because I saw things that her teachers were doing that I could use, and that I could accommodate, like in my classroom, and also modify. And so I think that we have to look at our elementary school teachers who are creative. I mean, they did scavenger hunts virtually. I mean, I saw my kids running around, running around the house. I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, we're doing a scavenger hunt. And so I saw those elementary teachers truly reach out to be creative, but we have to connect with each other. And that's how we're going to bridge the gap, so that we all can be on one page.
I completely agree. I stole my social emotional check-ins that I used with my high schoolers. I stole from my son's third grade teacher, because she did such a great job of really getting to, like, how are you feeling? What do you need? Like, she was so tuned in to those little people's feelings. And I realized as a high school teacher, it's the same thing. Yeah. So yes, we have to rely on each other as teachers, and steal best practices. And I think that also goes for you all who are out there who are informal educators or parents. Kind of be nosy what's happening in their classroom, and what can you steal out to do for question stems at your dinner table or on a weekend walk, to stay connected to your kid.
Great, thank you. So typically we would be ending right now, but we are going to push out another 5 minutes or so, because there's some critical questions in here that we'd like to get to. So hopefully you all can stay tuned. If not, of course, we'll send out the link, but there are some that we think are really important to go ahead and pose. And one, there's a series of questions, but they really center on some access and some skills. So thinking about the households where there may be the parent or caregiver doesn't have the skills to support their child's learning, or their child's technology needs, and or a lack of access to those technology needs, the equipment, the reliable Wi-Fi. How are those issues being addressed?
I am not a content policy expert, so I want to say that up front. But I will tell you that I've been on a lot of Department of Education workforce task force in the past 6 months, and technology is the number one thing that people are talking about in terms of equity. And so I think that, again, this is not all going to roll out overnight. It cannot. But the idea that reliable broadband internet is a basic human need, is one that the governor is aware of. And I think that that's where you're going to see funding and spending happening. Now, it's not going to be there for the fall, but I do think that you're going to see schools using some of the CARES Act money that they're getting. I think that's the money, that's the name of it. But I know they're getting federal funding, that they're going to be investing in hotspots and Chromebooks. I think that there's this understanding that kids have to have reliable technology and reliable, equitable internet, and we're going to see government funding happen for that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be as quick as we need it, because that would be now. But I do think you'll see hotspots and Chromebooks getting into the hands of our students who are most at need as soon as possible when school starts. And Ariane, you might do that a little bit more. I happen to be, I recognize privilege. We are in a small school system where kids were already one-to-one, and most of our students have access to internet. So we were able to hotspot kids who did not. But Ariane, you were in the Southeast Virginia, where I know there is a wide disparity in access to technology. So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Okay. Yes, and we had a lot of students in our area who did not have access. And it was extremely difficult. I had students who could not start at the beginning to complete their assignments, and I did have to be flexible to work with those particular students. But we were able to give out hotspots. We were able to get laptops, and so all of our students were able to get laptops so that they could complete their assignments. Unfortunately, it was a little bit later in the game, and so, but however, now that we are prepared, I think that it'll have a better flow once we start in the fall. I know that some students were able to go to the local libraries, and that they were able to use their hotspots even in, like in the parking lot. But if you don't have access or transportation, that was another issue. And there were some cases where we did have to drive out to some students' homes, like to deliver those particular hotspots.
We did that too, and they would drive for kids who still had packets. When they would get lunch delivery, they would get their packets and they would turn in work that way. I saw school systems that were taking buses that were wired for Wi-Fi into neighborhoods so kids could get on the bus and do schoolwork on the bus. So I think you'll see innovation like that happening in school systems. Even sometimes kids they're rural areas and the internet is spotty. So I think you'll see buses going out quite a bit. There are things we learned in the spring about how to make technology more equitable, and school systems are working on that now, plans to address those holes in access.
And Andrea, I did see something that was creative in where my kids go to school. It's a little bit smaller than where I teach, but they use the time of nutrition, like to help the students. And so when the students went to this particular location to pick up their the food, they actually had hot spots available for them. And so that means that someone is out there and someone is available so that they're not there alone, and they could ask questions and different things like that. So they had laptops available. They had hands-on activities available for the students as well. So I think we have to figure out a way to kind of just integrate and bring things together that way to make sure that it's that everything's accessible to the parents and teachers and the students.
Thank you. I really want to pose one last question, and the others I'm going to take later, but there are a few questions in there. If you could, concisely, and maybe we can send something out later, speak to the supportive services for children with IEPs, 504 plans. When things closed, they were missing things like their occupational therapy, speech therapy, other things like that. Are there plans in place, and what might that look like?
Again, I can't speak for every school system, but I can speak from the DOE and the expectation of what should be happening. I think that you will find that and a lot of you all are in school systems that are now declaring 100% distance learning. What you will see is that the buildings might be closed, but there are going to be access to the buildings and to teachers within buildings for our most vulnerable students. So you will see teachers going into the buildings and small groups of SPED students, or small groups of EL students, or small groups of 504 students, or just small groups of kids who don't have accommodations that need extra tutoring. So I think that even in distance learning, you're going to see sometimes students and teachers going into the building to do really supportive tutoring services. So I would say not worry, that's easy for me to say, but I do think that there are plans in place to get face-to-face instruction in very small groups for our students who need it the most. Ariane, would you say that you've heard that those plans happening as well?
I have the same thing, and also I noticed that the case managers they did a wonderful job during our crisis learning stage with reaching out to the parents. And I can only speak for the area in which I teach, but getting together with the case manager, writing down one of the things I saw one of the case managers asked to do was to write down the emotions and different things so that they can know how to make modifications to the IEPs. And I know that in the fall, students will have the opportunity to go, in person, just so they can get that additional support that they need as it relates to special education services.
And you heard me speak to this last week. The reason why schools want to try hybrid is because we know we need to have access to our most vulnerable students. And we know that our most vulnerable students need not only their accommodations, but access sometimes to our guidance counselors. And that's hard to do at home, which is why there was a push for hybrid. Now we see balance and safety, and we're going back to distance learning. I was talking to our head guidance counselor a couple of weeks ago, and she said she's going to invite kids in and they're going to socially distance in her office, even if we are in periods of distance learning. Or she said she's going to take lawn chairs and she's going to plop herself in backyards. So you're going to see, I think, a more concerted effort of how do we get kids, even in periods of distance learning. We were in crisis learning. We were figuring it out. Now we've had time to reflect. How do we get ourselves to our kids? You're going to see, we are in it for our kids. You're going to see us, whether it's hybrid or distance learning, do creative things to meet their needs.
I just want to say thank you both for being here. This is certainly a tough topic, and there aren't easy answers, and it's so different across, different localities and different, home situations, and there's just so much to still grapple with, but there is no question in our minds as to why your colleagues elected you as Teachers of the Year in different years. Your heart, your passion come through for the students, and that in and of itself is an uplift for us. So if any of you have lingering questions, I posted in the chat. If you send those to me, our two speakers have generously offered to provide answers to as many of the questions as they can, and we'll get those out to you with the recording link to this session. As always, you can find any of those recording links on our extension website. Next week, same time, same place, different topic. We hope to see you back again. For all, have a good weekend, do some self-care, and have a great week. We'll see you later. Bye.